Hello friends, today we are starting the new theories of international trade. Most of these theories are refinements, extension or modification of Heckscher Ohlin or factor endowment approach. In this session, we will be exploring what is known as the availability approach to international trade, popularized by Irving B Kravis. Welcome to this session. One of the important extension of the Heckscher Ohlin model was provided by Irving B Kravis when he introduced what is known as the availability approach or the availability theory of international trade. In his work in 1956 titled The Availability and Other Influences on the Composition of Trade, published in the Journal of Political Economy, he criticized one of the core assumptions of the Heckscher Ohlin model. We saw that Heckscher Ohlin model do assume countries have same technology or countries are placed on the same footings as far as technology is concerned. Kravis pointed out that the technological differences between countries can in fact determine or influence the pattern of trade. The model is known as, or the theory is known as the availability theory, because Kravis asserts that it is the domestic availability and non-availability of goods that influences the pattern of international trade. It's an extension in the sense that our traditional trade theory or our Heckscher Ohlin model says that it is factor endowment and factor intensities that influences the pattern of trade. So unlike the theory, even though there are a number of similarities between the Heckscher Ohlin theory and the Kravis theory of availability, but Kravis pointed out that the pattern of trade is influenced by availability and non-availability of commodities, availability and non-availability of goods. And he points out that a country will tend to specialize, a country will tend to export those commodities which are available domestically and tend to import those commodities which are not available domestically. A very simple assertion, but there are a number of implications as far as this particular argument. Now let us see. Domestic availability means commodities or goods are abundant as far as domestic demand is concerned, and a country will obviously able to increase the quantity of the commodity. So we can argue that availability basically means your elastic supply. Let me call it as elastic supply. That means if the goods are available and the country do able to increase the quantity of this particular commodity to meet even the foreign demand. That means the particular commodity is available in abundance in the country and this country is able to export this commodity. Then, so once this commodity is available, if the supply of this commodity is elastic, this country do able to increase the production of this commodity, increase the supply of this commodity, then the country tends to specialize, trying to export those commodity. And those which this country find it's unable to export, and he call it as unavailable. I will expand this particular term a little bit later. Unavailability means that commodity is not enough to meet even the domestic demand, and the production of this commodity cannot be increased without incurring a large cost. So once this commodity do not have available or do not in fact available in the domestic market, then the country tends to import. So the prime factor that influences the pattern of trade is the availability. That is why this theory is known as the availability theory or the availability approach to international trade. So availability and non-availability of commodities domestically determines the pattern of trade. If one particular commodity is available, then the country is tend to export those commodity. if a particular commodity do have an elastic supply, this country do have the flexibility to increase the quantity of that particular commodity to meet the rising foreign demand or to meet even the changes in the foreign demand, then the country tends to export those commodities, and the country will import those commodities in which it is unavailable, it is unable to produce enough to meet the domestic demand. So we call it as non-availability. And Kravis pointed out that even this non-availability can be defined in two ways, in absolute as well as relative. There are two concepts or two definitions for non-availability according to the availability approach. Absolute non-availability means that particular commodity is not at all available in the country. Not at all available. Say for example, diamonds in India. That particular commodity cannot be produced in the country like that. So if that particular commodity is not at all produced in the country, we call it as there is an absolute non-availability. If that particular commodity is produced in the country but it is not enough to meet the domestic demand, he call it as relative non-availability. So it's a relative sense, in the sense that it is non-available compared to the demand. Compared to the domestic demand, that particular commodity is non-available, or it is not available to meet the domestic demand. The production of the commodity is not adequate to meet the domestic demand, and this country will find it very difficult to increase the production of that particular commodity because it can be produced in a larger quantities only after incurring higher cost. So economically it is not feasible to produce that particular commodity. That's why we call it as relative non-availability. So relative non-availability means that particular commodity is short in quantity compared to the domestic demand. So those commodities, these two, when the country are facing absolute or relative non-availability of goods, then these commodities will be imported. If those commodities are available, those commodities will be exported as well. So this is the crux of the availability approach. The countries will export those commodities which are domestically available. The commodities which are domestically not available in absolute or relative sense will be imported. So this is the availability. That's why the model itself is known as the availability approach. Now, let us explore this concept of availability a little bit more, because that's where the availability approach provides an extension to the Heckscher Ohlin model. Kravis pointed out that there are 4 factors that will influence the availability of commodities. 4 factors that influence the availability of commodities as well as what he called the basis of availability. These are the 4 factors: the natural resources, the technological change, the product differentiation, and the government policy. Now let us examine each one of them and let us see how they in fact influences the so-called availability according to the Kravis theory. Now, for Kravis, natural resources plays a key role, because if a country is well endowed with natural resources, say for example mineral resources, this country will be able to produce a lot. Basically it's a factor endowment approach. Basically it's a comparative advantage approach. If a country do have an abundance of natural resources, they will tend to export. Putting in availability approach terminology, if natural resources are available, plenty, then this country can export those commodities which uses or utilizes natural resources. And if natural resources are not available, it is scarce, it is unavailable, then this country will tend to import those commodities that uses the natural resources. So first aspect or the first factor that influences the availability is more or less the same compared to our earlier theories of comparative advantage or even the factor endowment approach or the Heckscher Ohlin theory. There is no essential difference between the argument of the Kravis or the Heckscher Ohlin as far as the first one is concerned, the natural resources. But changes will happen when we move on to the second section. The second one is the technological change. We have already seen two theories of international trade based on technological differences. Hope you remember our technological gap theory, imitation lag hypothesis, and product cycle theory. We do had a video and a detailed discussion on how technology influences the pattern of trade. Now, Kravis pointed out that technological changes, or what he called the technological progress, will crucially influence the availability of resources. We are talking about different factors that influences the availability, don't we? Now, when there is technological progress, what is technological progress? Technological progress means you will be able to produce more output with the given input, and given output is possible with a lesser quantity of input, or in other words, the productivity will increase. Technological change means more production is possible, more output is possible, more goods is possible, more goods are available. Kravis' argument is that when there is technological progress, more goods will be possible, and those countries who are experiencing technological progress will have larger quantity of goods, larger availability of goods, and these larger availability of good will influence the pattern of trade, because when there is technical progress, there will be benefit of large scale production and specialization. Now this is an extension. This is definitely an extension with respect to the Heckscher Ohlin model, because in Heckscher Ohlin model, as you are well aware that in Heckscher Ohlin model there is no technical progress, because all countries are assumed to be having same technology. But that's why at the very onset we have said, Kravis pointed out that one of the limitations, there are a number of limitations to the Heckscher Ohlin model. One of the limitations of the Heckscher Ohlin model is that it believes that countries are having same technology. But Kravis pointed out that whenever there are technological differences, and if for those countries who are experiencing technological progress will obviously have greater production, or what he called greater availability of commodities, and when there are greater availability of commodities, these countries will be able to produce larger quantities. Now that's the second fact, and it will have an influence on the pattern of trade. Now we'll shift our focus to the third one, again, product differentiation. Another issue which was not taken up by the Heckscher Ohlin model, because in Heckscher Ohlin model the inherent assumption is perfect competition, perfectly competitive product market. In perfectly competitive product market, you are well aware that it is homogeneous product, it is not differentiated products. Now Kravis pointed out that when there is product differentiation, what is product differentiation? Producers will bring out new varieties of the product. Either it is real or fancy, we are not very sure, but still they will try to bring out new products, embodying maybe new technology, new packaging, new system. Now, whenever there are product differentiation, those people who bring out new products, variety of the same product, will have a temporary monopoly. Following the trade based on the technological difference, we have seen how there will be temporary monopoly, and ultimately there will be an imitation when this monopoly will be wiped out. Now, whenever there are product differentiation, at least those people who are having this monopoly can expand trade, or will have a dominance on trade. So product differentiation and bringing out variety of the product by the producers will influence the pattern of trade. And the last one is government policy. Kravis pointed out that government policy with respect to that of international trade, like imposition of tariff or non-tariff barriers and existence of any kind of, say, collusive oligopoly like cartel, for example, all this will have an influence on the pattern of trade. Again a deviation, again an elaborate or an extension of the Heckscher Ohlin model, because in Heckscher Ohlin model there is no government influence, because there is no government regulation, everything is free, trade is free, there is no transportation cost. But Kravis pointed out that the government policy with respect to trade, that is with respect to the tariff measures, we will have a detailed session on tariff and non-tariff barriers. With respect to the tariff, and non-tariff barriers, and even the presence of what he called the presence of cartel like OPEC. He cited in his work the issue of with respect to the cartel as well. Now, all these issues like tariff, non-tariff barriers and other influences of international trade, and most what he called the government policy with respect to international trade will influence the availability of goods. So we have seen 4 factors, 4 bases that influences the availability of goods. These factors influences the availability, and availability in fact determines the pattern of trade. Hope that that particular thinking is clear to you. These are the 4 factors that influences the availability, and the availability influences the international trade. That is why it's known as the availability approach. Now, one more thing as far as these 4 factors are concerned. The first 3 factors, namely natural resources, technological change and product differentiation. These 3 factors tend to increase international trade according to Kravis. Kravis pointed out that these 3, natural resources, technological change and product differentiation, tends to increase international trade or will have a positive influence on international trade. When there is abundance of natural resources or increase in the quantity of natural resources, or according to Kravis, increase in the availability of natural resources, it will increase trade. If there is technological progress, it will increase trade. If there is increase in product differentiation, it will increase trade. We have seen the influence of product differentiation and economies of scale in another session. In our earlier session, I have put the link of this video in our description box. We have seen the issue of intra-industry trade, how product differentiation and resultant economies of scale influences the pattern of trade, and the issue of brand recruitment models. Go and see that particular argument if you are not very aware or very well aware of how product differentiation influences the pattern of trade. Now, these 3, the natural resources, the technological change and product differentiation, according to Kravis, will increase trade, will increase international trade, or will have a positive influences on the volume of trade. But according to him, the government policy will in fact have a discouraging effect, or what he called a dampening effect on international trade. That means increasing government restriction or government's influence on international trade will tend to reduce the quantity of trade or the volume of trade. So, even though the first 3 factors increase the volume of trade, the last one, the government policy or the interference of the government with respect to the free flow of commodities and services will definitely reduce trade according to Kravis. Now, before winding up this session, let us examine the argument of Kravis using a very hypothetical example. Now, let us say that we have 4 countries. I will put country's name as country A, B, C, D. These are countries. We have 4 countries. Country A, country B, country C and country D. Let us suppose that these countries trying to produce, say, 2 commodities. For example, let us say that these commodities are wheat and say steel. Simply an example. That means we have 4 countries, country A, B, C, D. They are trying to produce 2 commodities, wheat and steel. Obviously, production of any commodity requires factor services. And let us say that both commodities, production of wheat as well as steel, requires capital and labor. Obviously, any production of any commodity requires capital and labor. Now, apart from capital and labor, production, let us assume that production of wheat requires fertile land or agricultural land, whatever you call it. And production of steel requires iron ore, which is the raw material for the production of steel. See, we have 2 commodities. Production of wheat requires fertile land. Production of steel requires its raw material, which is iron ore. So, these are the basic things. Now, let us see how the factors or how the resources are available in 4 countries. We have 4 countries, country A, B, C, D. Out of these 4 countries, how factors are available? Let us assume that country A do have abundance of land or fertile land. Country B to have land with it. Country C to have land with it. While country D do not have fertile land, adequate land. Or once more, out of these 4 countries, country A, B, C have availability of fertile land. Availability of fertile land following the availability approach. And country D do not have land, but country D do have what is known as the presence of iron ore. Do not have abundance of land or what is called the availability of fertile land, but they do have iron ore. Let us also assume that these country B as well as C do have the presence of iron ore or do have the availability of iron ore. See, we have 4 countries. We have seen the availability of resources in this country. See, country A have only land, fertile land with them. There is availability of fertile land, fertile agricultural land in country A. While country B do have land as well as iron ore. Same is the case of country C, which had land as well as iron ore. While country D had only iron ore. They do not have the availability of large quantity of fertile land. Now, following the Kravis availability approach, we can very easily see that this country A will specialize in the production of wheat. Why wheat? Because production of wheat requires fertile land and country A do have land at its disposal. Land is available. So the goods that is available in country A will be wheat because there is the presence of fertile land, there is the availability of fertile land, and country A can specialize in the production of wheat. Following the same logic, the country D can specialize in the production of steel. They can only produce steel because that's the factor or that's a resource available with it, which is the iron ore. So with the only iron ore, it can only produce steel. Now we can examine a pattern of trade at least between 2 countries. That means this country A can export wheat to country D and country D can in fact export steel to country A. There is a trade between country A and country C because country A have wheat at its disposal, country D have steel at its disposal. These countries can exchange with each other. There is a pattern of trade that will govern between country A and D is that country A will export wheat, country D will export steel, country A will import steel, country D will import wheat. Now we have 2 more countries, country B and C, and there is a unique situation. Both countries have 2 resources, availability of 2 resources. Both have fertile land as well as iron ore. Now that means that these country B and C, these 2 countries can produce both commodities. They can produce wheat, they can produce steel as well. Now, Kravis pointed out that who produces wheat, who produces steel, in our example B or C, depends upon the comparative advantage. Which country do have a comparative advantage in the production of wheat and steel, and that comparative advantage will govern the pattern of trade and international prices. Obviously there will be an exchange ratio between these 2 countries, and international commodity prices and the terms of trade will be determined by the intensity of demand for foreign goods and intensity of domestic demand for foreign goods and foreign demand for domestic goods. We have already seen the issue of reciprocal demand and how it determines the terms of trade. Now the trade between B and C will be governed by the comparative cost doctrine. So this is the theory. This is the availability approach of Irving B Kravis, in which he pointed out that the availability and non-availability of commodities, the availability and non-availability of goods determines the pattern of trade. So the central point of importance is whether goods are domestically available or not. If goods are domestically available or if the supply of goods are elastic, then country will export those commodities. If commodities are unavailable either in an absolute sense or in a relative sense, the country will import those commodities. And there are 4 factors that influence the core issue, which is the availability. That is, we have the natural resources, technological change, product differentiation and government policy, in which the first 3 will have a positive influence on international trade, or these 3 tends to increase international trade, or the government interference, or the last issue, last factor tends to have a negative effect as far as international trade is concerned. So this is the availability theory or the availability approach to international trade, which is one of the extension of the Heckscher Ohlin model. So it's a very simple approach, but has been criticized because it's do not have an adequate empirical support, and basically it's a loose model as far as methodology is concerned. So that's it for the day. Hope that this session is useful to you. So until we meet next time, stay safe, happy learning. Thank you.